I think about that question more than I think about how does polyamory influence my Christianity. I'm more thinking, how does my Christianity influence my polyamory?
Hello, and welcome to the Sacred Not Sinful podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kevin Jensen, a Bible scholar and sex educator helping Christians find practical ways to integrate faith and sexuality. If you're new, this podcast brings you stories of hope and resources to experience beautiful, intimate, and deeply satisfying connections with God and with others without leaving your faith or your sexuality at the door. Ready to get started? Let's dive into today's episode.
So here we are, and I'm really curious, Jen, to hear a little bit of your story. It's kind of like how you got to where you are today, some of the challenges along the way. And just to start off with, can you tell me a little bit about you? How would you describe yourself for our listeners?
I would describe myself as a Christian. I'm polyamorous. I'm a mom. I'm a partner. I'm bisexual. Those are definitely different descriptions I have for myself. I guess as far as my Christianity, I go to the United Church of Christ, so that would make me Protestant, Congregationalist, mainline Protestant. I also tend to more liberation theology and open and relational theology, sort of like in the identity of God. But I think most people would know me as just being the polyamorous Christian.
I think this was actually my impression of you as well, because we met at the Wild Goose Festival.
Yes.
And you were you were hosting the Polyamory and Christianity panel with one of my friends. So I was like, this person's going to be very interesting. Just for my sake, and maybe for those who don't know, how would you describe liberation theology?
I would say liberation theology becomes where it's really more like centered around social justice, maybe not in the more political way, but actually more in the direct movement way, in this sense that the goal of Christianity is to be on earth and to be the hands and feet of God on earth and fight for the liberation of all people, especially people of color, against sexism, against homophobia, against transphobia, and against, honestly, also against the rich, and just to kind of create a more just society based on Christian principles. And the theology of liberation is sort of just this freedom of people to live on this earth and thrive and not. And I grew up Pentecostal, so I was always taught life on earth is supposed to be shit for everybody. Are we allowed to curse on your podcast?
I haven't decided yet, so go ahead and just bring all of yourself here.
Okay. So I was taught basically that life on earth was supposed to be terrible, and that all these bad things would happen, and then when you get to heaven, then everything's good. But liberation theology is more about, no, Jesus came to earth in order to create the kingdom of God here on earth. And if you are looking to get into liberation theology, I suggest you read James Cone. Is that correct? The James Cone?
I'm gonna have to write this down.
Let me look it up too.
Yeah. I think every time we've talked, I've gotten something new.
James Cone, he specifically wrote on Black theology, and he wrote, and his major book was A Black Theology of Liberation. But it's really good, even for people like me who are white, and honestly, white people should read it too, especially maybe.
Yeah, that's really important to be able to take on another perspective. I was talking with somebody the other day, and he said, straight people can't actually see their sexuality. because it's just built into the normalcy of society. And so it's important for them to be able to talk with somebody who doesn't identify as straight in order to understand, hey, actually, you do have a huge focus on your sexuality. It's just invisible to you because you've never seen it from this angle.
Yes, people aren't aware. If anything, there's always such like a backlash whenever it's like, oh, this gay couple was featured, this trans person, and like there's always a backlash, like this is being shoved down our throats without the irony of understanding. It's like, well, like literally there's an assumption of monogamy and heterosexuality shoved down everybody's throats all the time. And you're not even aware of it. It's like, the people who used to say like, why is there no heterosexual pride flag? And it's like, do you mean like every single movie that ever comes out has heterosexuality in it? And like every couple you probably knew growing up in like a small rural conservative area that you thought or assumed was heterosexual, it's just like so assumed. And of course, monogamy is even worse. So
even more so, I feel like we have a further journey to go on that right now.
Yeah.
What would you say when it comes to this idea of liberation and freedom? What does that look like for you in terms of sexuality?
In terms of sexuality, it would be the idea that, people aren't having to choose their faith or their sexuality. And that not only does that include being gay or bisexual or queer, it also includes non-monogamy. It includes, because there's a lot of people out there, even like there are a lot of people out there who say like, oh, purity culture is bad because it shames women. But then if you talk to them, you find out not only are they like not affirming of same-sex relationships, but they're not even affirming of like premarital sex themselves. They just don't like the way it's being phrased. And in my opinion, even Christians who call themselves affirming need to do a lot of work, especially when it comes to non-monogamy, especially since there's a lot of overlap in like LGBTQ spaces with non-monogamy. And in my opinion, if you still think that monogamy is the only way to go, it's like, ask yourself why, and ask yourself why you think that is. Like, if you come to a place where you're accepting of same-sex relationships, why are you not accepting of non-monogamy relationships? Like, are you still icked out by like the thought of somebody having sex with more than one person? Like, so I just think that if you're deconstructing that work, and if you want to really kind of liberate your mind toward non-monogamy, you should at least, come to a place where you're affirming it. And it's not that I think that everybody needs to be non-monogamous or anything, or that everybody even naturally is, but it definitely is that I think you need to see that other people who are non-monogamous are still like expressing a healthy form of sexuality that can be in line with their faith.
Right. I think those are two keys for me, that healthy sexuality and in line with your faith. I think, like, what would you say to somebody who sees it and they're like, there is no way that non-monogamy can be a healthy sexual expression?
I mean, honestly, like, I used to get really offended at that, but I don't anymore, because it is, and like, I will invite you to my house. You can hang out with us. Like, I have kids, and my kids have been raised in a polyamorous home with three parents for the past like since the beginning of 2020, but like they've known that we were non-monogamous since 2016 or 17. They've known it about us. And if you think like that, they're like, and it becomes such a part of their life that it's not even that interesting to them anymore. Like it's like, okay, like I have three parents, but also, I want to go play Roblox. That's what I really want to do. That's what my kids are like.
Right.
And I think that a lot of people still come from this conservative place when it comes to sexuality. It's like, the Bible says that you can't have same-sex marriage, and they get to a place where it's like, okay, I don't believe that. I think that there are plenty of healthy same-sex relationships, but they're not really applying that same logic to non-monogamous people. It's like, why? And someone like me who has really like I have two really intense partnerships. I have my husband of 15 years yesterday. We got married when I was 20. And
Wow.
then my partner of 5 years. Those are like long-term relationships. It's not like
Yeah.
I take relationships really seriously, and my relationships are more serious, and is commitment, and there is, this really like level of depth in my relationships. But I also think it applies to not short-term relationships or hookups or flings, like there's certainly instances in which maybe those things can be unhealthy for you individually, but it's not by default because it's a hookup. Like, maybe people are having fun and enjoying their bodies. What is bad about that per se? Like, why is that bad?
Now that is the side of the question that I always get frustrated with, because there is so much focus on why is it wrong. My big question that I'm trying to shift in my writing is, how do we ask the question is what makes it right, or how do we create a healthy scenario? Because just because it's not wrong to do something doesn't necessarily mean maybe that it's
right.
Exactly.
Oh,
so
yeah, I agree for sure.
So a question for you, having grown up in a conservative, did you grow up in purity culture, would you say?
Oh, I had a true love waits ring.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. Yeah. Big time. I got sex ed that like was just showing pictures of diseased genitals and being told that if you like lost your virginity, then you were like a used up piece of gum, or an unwrapped Christmas present that nobody would want to open. Like really horrifying stuff.
All right, that sounds fairly standard actually, but yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I reposted a piece from that article you just published, because I thought you captured it so well, where you're like, some of these people have never seen a girl having to go up and confess her sins in front of everybody.
Oh my God.
Or like experience the abuse that's there. Like we don't see that.
Oh my God, no, these anti-feminist, irreligious liberals who are liberals, that was in air quotes for the podcast people. They like they're just like glamorizing this because they see the downfalls of what they consider like this secular hookup culture, where like they're not getting the commitment that they want, or they're not getting the sort of relationships, and they're like sick of like what I guess the dating world looks like. And I mean, there's definitely flaws, and there's definitely people who are unhappy with that, but the idea that you're like, okay, this means the sexual revolution has failed is horrifying to me.
Right. Yeah. No, I think we may have another conversation in the future just about feminism and women's rights, because this is something that I feel like is not really forefront in our conversations right now, because the sexual revolution happened, and so people just assume these things that we don't even think about, and yet these rights feel to me they're under attack constantly, not just by purity culture and this new what you're talking about, but also from a lot of the polarity teachings outside of the faith community. Anyway, so that's a soapbox for me. Well, I want to stay focused though on this integration of Christianity and sexuality, because you grew up in a space where you were not allowed to really ask questions, where you don't get a lot of information. What did it look like for you to discover what a healthy sexual expression would look like for you? What was that process like?
I grew up on the internet, I guess, kind of, where like before the days that they had parent browsing and stuff like that. So a lot of my early sexuality because I wasn't learning about it at school, I wasn't learning about it at church, and my parents at least like tried to give me like the biological like stuff. Like they weren't they were pretty close-minded. Like I wasn't supposed to have sex or anything, but like they would talk to me about it if I asked. But other than that, like the questions I would have, I would Google, and like that was the days of like AM chat rooms and Yahoo questions, and it was this like awful exposure to extremely adult topics and things I had never heard of before in my life. And it was so fascinating with me. And the way that I would explore my sexuality in a safe way was through, they call it sexting now, but in my day, it would be like ASL, age, sex, location, you know, so want a cyber. And so that's what I would do is I would type out like these words of like things that I thought that people did during sex, or like I thought, you know, I'd seen in maybe like movies or something, but I wasn't supposed to watch, but like movies. And like that was the sort of the way that I expressed my sexuality. But I certainly never heard of non-monogamy, and I was obviously like being told that like same-sex relationships were sinful and wrong. I actually came out as bisexual really early. It was a live journal post, and I wrote that I was bisexual because I had never heard that term before. But somebody at school said, "Oh, I'm bisexual." And I was like, "What's that?" And I was like, "Wow." I was like, "That's me too." I was like, I like this fascination I've been feeling with this girl is the same as the crush that I would have on a boy. And my mom found that post, and I got in huge trouble. And I was like I was banned from the internet for a little bit because of it. And so like after that, like push all those feelings down. Like I don't want to go, you know, I was afraid of hell. So when I said that I was bisexual, I hadn't done anything. I was just sort of like realizing this thing about myself. And so I pushed it down really far. And then as soon as I turned 18 and I met somebody who I like had a crush on and started dating, I was like, okay, well, I need to have sex. And like, once I can have sex regularly, like I'll be fixed, and I won't want to be this, I won't be this horny anymore. I won't be this horny anymore. And like, and I'm still married to him. We deconstructed together. We started on the path of non-monogamy and polyamory together. And so it worked out. Not everybody you are dating at 18 ends up to be your perfect partner right away, but like, I was like, okay, you know. And so I thought if I became this perfect evangelical Christian wife, this perfect evangelical Christian mom, because I had 2 kids before I was 25 too, like I thought, like, I'm doing it right. This is exactly what my life is supposed to be. This is exactly what Christians are supposed to be doing. And like, then, you know, I won't have these thoughts anymore. You know, I remember having multiple crushes on multiple people for as long as I can remember. Even like in elementary school, I would remember like I remember somebody, this is very heteronormative, where somebody was like, let's have weddings, like with like preschoolers or whatever, like let's have pretend weddings. And I would be like, well, I like this guy, but I want this one too. And in fact, my husband, I had 2 crushes on 2 guys, and I sent both of them, this is dating, MySpace questions. And I was like, well, whoever responds is the one I'm going to pursue. And it was Daniel, who is now my husband and the father of my children. And I thought, you know, for a while, but then after a few years, after I had my kids were older and I was done having kids, I was like starting to have more feelings towards people again. And I'm like, why is this happening? Like, I still love my husband. I love my kids. I love my family. I don't want to lose them. It's not like I had this urge to do something crazy behind his back or like run off from my family. Like, I know I love them too. It was just like, I just kept falling in love with other people. And I never had an affair. I would say that maybe like emotionally I would like an emotional thing, but I never, you know, did what I would call like physical cheating on Daniel. But eventually I had to tell him, like, I don't know if I can do monogamy for the rest of my life because I'm really struggling.
Wow.
And that's how I ended up on the path toward non-monogamy.
And so it was a surprise for you because you had this image, like, if I'm a perfect a wife and a mother, I'm not going to have to struggle with this anymore.
Yeah.
And then it came back and you're like, oh no, this is what I was experiencing in elementary school. Now I followed all the rules and it still hasn't gone away. Were you Where was your relationship with God through all of this? Like, was that a difficult part of navigating this process?
Yeah. I was deconstructing vaguely. I was becoming more and more like left-ish politically and like personally. Um, I had already like, I guess like my family is like Republican, and I mean not even conservative. Like my family is like involved in Republican politics. Um, More like old school kind of Republican politics, less Trumpian, but still like they're big on anti-abortion. They're big on like small government in quotes again.
Mm-hmm.
And I, it was, and I started realizing that I just like there were things that they were doing that I didn't agree with anymore. Like I was always tended to be more libertarian in the sense that I thought, why should these things be illegal? Why should same-sex marriage be illegal? Like I knew gay people. I moved around a lot. I didn't just attend Christian school, so I would meet people and I'd be like, why should these people have fewer rights than me?
Yeah.
And then like financially, like I started volunteering for a food charity that made me not so financially fiscal conservative, like fiscally conservative. That's the phrase I'm looking for anymore. I just being around, I started thinking like, wow, all these poor people are suffering, and like the people I support don't even care. They're not even doing anything about it.
Right.
And then just like theologically, I started reading Rachel Held Evans' blog a lot. I was reading more Rob Bell and I remember when I started college in 2006 that Rob Bell hadn't done his Universalist book. So Rob Bell was like still
Right.
acceptable for evangelicals, but then he wrote the Universalist book and people were like, no.
Yeah. You were in a conservative Christian college at the time?
Yes, Lee University. I like to shout them out because because I write about them a lot, and their horrifying treatment toward LGBTQ individuals and covering up sexual assault. So I always call them out by name. Sorry.
Well, it was probably similar to my university. It's like you're in a Christian context, and then you have the dream child is suddenly switched sides, or so it seems, and is now a universalist instead of an exclusivist.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing you going through is very interesting, because it sounds like the tipping point for deconstruction came from you being aware of some Christian values and then being in the political public sphere and saying, oh, this doesn't match up. What are we doing here?
Yeah, definitely. Like it wasn't just that I was so horny that I needed to find a theology that I needed to pack into my life. I would say I was deconstructing before I even considered non-monogamy, or like certainly before I talked about it with Daniel, certainly before I started doing anything.
Yeah.
So I was starting to deconstruct already, and I just wasn't like, and this sort of happened separately but also together, if that makes sense. When you're reassessing everything you've ever been taught and everything you believe, then you're also like, maybe I'm not monogamous. Like I didn't hear the word polyamory ever before I started looking into it. Like it wasn't something I'd ever heard of. The only form of non-monogamy I'd ever even heard of was swinging, and that was like a joke on TV. I certainly didn't know anybody who was a swinger or anything.
So you're not really aware of like a place you wanted to end up in terms of sexual liberation. You were just like asking all kinds of questions, not just about sex, but about God, the church, politics. All of this stuff is all happening at the same time, it sounds like.
Yes, very much so. I just I was like throwing it all up in the air, and as far as my relationship with God, it would have been easy for me to be like, okay, I'm not a Christian anymore. I don't believe this, but it's not true. I did believe it. I really liked Jesus. I really liked my Christian faith. It was important to me. It's still important to me.
Yeah.
Like I thought, I tried being an atheist, like, oh, I'm not going to go to church, but I'm just not an atheist. Like from like the core of my belief, I believe in a higher power or a God of some sort. And my expression of God that I feel most comfortable with is through the Christian faith. And I'm like a huge fan of Jesus. Like, I don't think I would have even come to my political beliefs or my like being like a more progressive person if it wasn't for the Christian beliefs. I would say that my Christian beliefs and reassessing them is kind of what drove me toward progressivism in the first place.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did a lot of work to try to like maintain and keep my faith. It was very important to me. One of the things I did is that for a while I was working at the Supreme Court of Virginia when I first moved to Richmond in 2014. And there's a huge church next to that building called St. Paul's Episcopalian Church. I think it's one of the largest churches in Richmond. It's definitely like one of the oldest, like a historical church. And they had this sermon, like they had this program where it was called like for like every day of Lent, they would have these speakers come, and they were all progressive speakers. And I would go on my lunch break. It would be from like 12:30 to 1, and I would go on my lunch break and see every single, just walk over there and watch. And they had huge names too. They like not just like Nadia Bowles-Weber was there, Brian McLaren was there, some, I'm trying to remember who else. I saw so many speakers though of that like later. John Shelby Spund was there. If you've ever heard of him, he died recently. He was actually a former pastor of that church, and I had no idea. And I would just like sit there and like take it all in, trying so like just going on my way like to keep like taking in all this faith. I was like hungrier for, I was maybe even hungrier for God, to use a very evangelical phrase, that than I had ever been before.
That's fair. It's fascinating to me how many people I talk to who actually like, I also shared this phase with you where I'm actually realizing that, oh no, I actually do want a depth of intimacy with God in this pursuit, but I'm not ready to settle for calling this like I had grown up with, where so many things seemed misaligned with what we were saying and what we were doing. And I was like, I need some way for all of this to integrate together so that I'm living truth, not just talking about it. And yeah, I hear that. I also love it because it's almost like when you get down to the core of it, instead of having to be in relationship with God because you're scared of going to hell, you actually are like, I want to know you. And now you start forming a relationship instead of like some sort of legal obligation.
Yeah, like I had never, it is really disheartening how many people's entire spiritual formation is around avoiding hell, because there's such an element of God that you're missing out on. It's so depressing. It's, you know, I feel like people like hang on to that, like, oh, I really need like, because maybe they wouldn't have their faith without that, and I feel sorry for them.
Yeah, I hear that. But it's also really hard to go through that shift from like where everything is laid out. Here's what life looks like. Like you had the image of here's how the person who is holy behaves. Here's how somebody who's walking with God looks like. You know, they get married, they have kids, they're not attracted to other people. You know, they're probably very heterosexual, very monogamous. And if you're super conservative, you don't even enjoy sex too much because that would be idolatry. But what was the most uncomfortable part for you in this deconstructing? Like, was it the aspect of sex? Was it the politics? Was it the faith? Was it just all wrapped up together for you?
That's an interesting question. A lot of people were willing to come on my journey with me, because especially like my family at first, they saw how into God I was getting during this like deconstruction stage. I kept a little blog while I was going to all these Lenten services where I talked about like what I was experiencing and what I was thinking. And they were pretty supportive of me. And like, even when they didn't agree with my more progressive values, they saw that I was really serious in my activism. But I would say once like the non-monogamy came along, then they were like, oh, well, this is fake now. Like you're just doing it for sex. So that was uncomfortable. And but honestly, I enjoyed all of it. Like most of it, the only thing that bummed me out at all were other people's reactions. And like I can't control what other people react, and I can't control other people's opinions.
Right.
And it used to really upset me how people belittled my faith. Once I came out as non-monogamous, and but it doesn't bother me anymore, but it definitely did at first.
Yeah. Tell me
and
more.
people,
Tell us more about that.
yeah, people, sorry. No, affirming people, just because I think something about non-monogamy is people assume that sex is dirty regardless. Like they don't like the idea of, I've been called an adulterer, I've been called like a fallen woman, I've been called all sorts of things, and it doesn't matter. I've been called names that I enjoy being called in bed, so it doesn't matter. So but I just, the idea, it really did genuinely upset me that people would assume that it was like a lack of faith in God, or like that my religion wasn't as serious anymore, because I've never stopped going to church. I don't know how many other deconstructioners can say that. I never stopped going to church. I stopped going to a church, like an Assembly of God church, and the next week I was at a United Church of Christ church that I had been eyeing for a while anyway. Like I never have stopped going to church. I'm a big believer in religion, in community, in faith. I pray. Like I think that I take it seriously, and now I'm confident enough in my own faith that like other people's opinions don't bother me. It's like, I could have made a career out of just talking about polyamory, or just talking about like maybe polyamory parenting, whatever. But instead, I specifically like to talk about it in a faith-based context because it's so important to me.
Yeah. And what I heard was there was a point in time where other people were questioning your faith because of your sexuality.
Absolutely. They think they can get behind like, oh, you believe in social justice stuff, you don't like you believe in liberation theology, you believe in like helping poor people, that's all like that. All that stuff all feels ooey gooey. It's not like overly political, it's not like overly controversial. But even I've got comments even from non-religious people when I came out as polyamorous. People were like, is that safe for your kids? Is that, is that good for you? Is that good for your mental health?
Right. And
it was upsetting. And it was upsetting because at no point did I ever give up my faith, ever, not even a little bit. And it was so strange to me that they were all on board with, my Christianity and like my position of my faith, until I was like, okay, I'm also, have relationships outside my marriage. And then people were like, what? That can't be. Even people who were affirming of LGBTQ relationships felt that way.
Yeah. So from an external standpoint, people couldn't understand it. Did you have difficulty internally reconciling these things?
I mean, to an extent. I also knew that both of those things were core parts of my personality, and I believe in, not everybody is this way or even believes it, but like I believe that I'm polyamorous as like an identity, and that I think I'm naturally polyamorous. It's not just something I'm choosing. Like I can remember being attracted to multiple people for as long as I can remember, having multiple crushes, all of that. And I think that's like inherent in my nature. But to me, honestly, it never was a question of like, are these things irreconcilable? I looked for I definitely was looking for other polyamorous Christians, and the only ones I could find were ones who were closeted also. So like at a certain point, I was like, somebody needs to talk about this. And then I was like, all right, it's going to be me.
I love it. Well, that's a lot of courage and really important, because why do you think it is? And I guess I'll present it this way. I see two reasons why people, for the most part, would be closeted. about their sexuality. One is because they're afraid of what other people are going to say. And then two, it's because they don't have that same sort of internal confidence that you found.
So I'll also say this in that, like, I don't rely on my parents for childcare or money or like my family. Like, I haven't relied on them for anything. Also, all of our family was maybe not obligated, but definitely like wanted to stay in our lives because of their grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't in danger of losing my family connections. I didn't need their money. I wasn't in danger of being fired because my employer didn't care. Like nobody else's employer cared.
Right.
I also lived in Richmond, Virginia, which is like, I'm from Tennessee, so all of my family lives in Tennessee. And so it felt like I was a little like distant and like safer to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the first part of your question again?
Well, what do you think it would take for all of the people who are closeted and like they're exploring or practicing polyamory, but they won't tell anybody about it, especially not another Christian? Like, why do you think that is? Why do you think that it needs to be a secret?
Oh, another thing is because it's not just you that goes like on stage, it's your whole marriage. So if you get divorced, like people are really self-conscious, like, because I'll be honest, like a lot of people explore non-monogamy and maybe the relationship's not in the best place, especially if they're coming at it from already being coupled.
Mm-hmm.
And then so like things fall apart. And so people are like, oh, that's non-monogamy, and it's not, and it doesn't matter how many monogamous relationships end every day.
Yeah.
But people are like, oh, that never would have happened for non-monogamy. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe non-monogamy was the catalyst, but maybe this relationship wasn't meant to be anyway.
Yeah. So there's a lot of risk to it.
And other Christians are more self-conscious. Polyamorous parents are more self-conscious. A lot of people, I don't like to say that polyamorous people and non-monogamous people are super oppressed, but there is one area in which they are, which is like children, and like, children can be they're afraid of their kids being taken away by an ex-partner. It's like, what if your ex is like, hey, my ex-wife is bringing all these people around my kids all the time, and it's an unstable environment. You get a conservative judge, you might be screwed. There's so many factors to consider. In my opinion, people should be more open about it, and people should be brave enough to come out. But I also know that I come from a place where I had like all these environmental situations and scenarios in which made me feel safer to come out. I'm still married to my children's father, so there's no danger that he's going to take my kids away or anything.
I can see that. Do you think for some people there's like still a spiritual question of whether it's okay, even though they're like, yeah, I naturally want to do this, but I don't know, they can't tell for sure if God might be okay with it or not? Yes.
Especially if you've been raised in purity culture and evangelicalism, it's so hard to get around. There's so many narratives in the Bible about, adultery, or like people who are punished for sexual reasons. And because so many people, even if you say you don't take the Bible literally, some people still do. And it's really hard to move past that kind of like ingrained messaging. And, people, maybe they look towards like, oh, what about polygamy in the Bible? Okay, that's like patriarchal polygamy, in which the women probably didn't have a choice, and it was only the man who had multiple partners. Like, that's not a model that I like. Both of my partners are male. It's not certainly not a like, it's not the model that I would want in my life. So, but I always think, there's so many sexual models in the Bible that are so unhealthy in this context, that it's hard for me to understand anymore why people are still afraid of it and why they would still like strive to like impress it. But because culture at large is still not as accepting of non-monogamy, it's way scarier than coming out even as gay in certain context.
Right. I'm thinking right now about my book. Like, one of the reasons why I wrote this book, Sacred Not Sinful, is because I was like, somebody needs to actually go in and wrestle with these apparent biblical contradictions, and then our cultural application or interpretation of that. And what you said about polygamy is the same thing that I found with adultery, is the way that the law was applied was an extraordinary patriarchal context. And just one example of that is the fact that if a woman said that she was a virgin and the bride price was paid for a virgin bride, and it turns out that she wasn't, she could be stoned to death on her wedding night. But there was nothing like that for a man. There wasn't even a question asked of whether the male partner had ever had sex with anybody. Like, the word virgin is so tied to female and this property transfer that it's basically the same word for virgin and for woman. There is no such thing as a virgin man.
Oh my God. I didn't know. You're telling me something I didn't know until today. So I'm not surprised. And I'm also like, I think people who want to maintain their faith are afraid of vilifying the Bible to this extent. But I think, it's, if you look at it from this historical context, then it's like, okay, well, lots of societies and cultures were like this. Unfortunately, it was also not great. And it's really great that we've evolved in these other ways. Now, can we evolve on this issue too?
Right. And the story of Jesus is like, it's the reason why I'm a Christian is because Jesus completely upends the whole thing. And you get into this New Testament, and suddenly it's like, in Christ there is no male or female, slave or free, Jew or Greek, and all these distinctions were what made somebody a good Jew back in the day. And now Jesus comes and says, hey, we're all children of God. We're doing away with all of these social distinctions, monogamous, non-monogamous. No, we are all equal before God. And using that as our starting point for faith, I mean, I think it aligns with what you were talking about at the beginning, this notion of justice.
Yeah. I personally, I love talking about polyamory, but for me, liberation is the center of what I believe. It's just that I also happen to personally be polyamorous and a Christian. But I think a lot of people just need to finish deconstructing, honestly, and then you can come to a place where you are more you recognize more these sort of like inherent issues and like why we need to move on from these sort of very specific models of what you think sex needs should look like. It's like, what are you still hanging on to? If you say you've deconstructed, what are you still hanging on to? That like forms the basis of your morality from the Bible. And like, where do you go from here?
Well, what would you advise somebody who say they're on that journey and they're like, oh my goodness, like I'm deconstructing, but I'm really scared to touch sex because everybody knows that sex and Satan are best friends, right? So we don't go there. How would you encourage somebody who wants to deconstruct or open that up, but maybe do so in a way that is safe, in a way that like they know it's aligned with their faith as opposed to maybe challenging it?
Other than read your book, I would say, to seek out, if you're really, really struggling with your sexuality, I think you need to ask yourself, like, a lot of people are coming, even though they're married, monogamous, and they want to stay married and monogamous, are coming to realize maybe they identify as queer, maybe they have a certain kink that they've never explored. Maybe they wish they had expressed their sexuality more. Now, I don't want to like tell you to run off and go do all the sex stuff you want to do, because like if you're married and monogamous and you want to remain that way, don't hurt the other person in your relationship in the process. Be mindful of their feelings, be mindful of like your family. But you can at least read books about it. You can learn things about yourself. You can learn, what your sexuality is, what you want out of sex, what you want out of life. You don't have to go out and be in an orgy in order to figure out what your own relationship is to your own sexuality. You can still research that, and at the very least you can learn to affirm other people in their journeys, even if it's not something you want for yourself. Because, you know, there's so many different things that I think we have all, like, especially if you've been raised in purity culture, that we've like kept hidden down inside us in as far as like sexuality. Read, you know, read up on it, read up on, like, you know, you want to have like mindful consent-based models, not just but of course you also want to take it a step further and take in your own emotional health and take in the emotional health of others, and have an environment or a person that you can communicate with, like a community or your partner or whoever.
Yeah.
I also am a big believer in going to affirming churches only. I think I don't think you should go to a non-affirming church. That's maybe a controversial belief that I have, but it's one that I have. But in order to support other people and their sexuality, just, you know, you have to affirm them, and then maybe you can learn to also affirm yourself.
One of the big questions I know I had, I don't know if you faced this quite so much, but like, what gave you permission to actually go start looking for all this information, to start doing this kind of research that you're talking about?
What gave me permission? I just could not. It was so important. Honestly, it was so important for me to maintain my faith, and I was afraid I was going to lose it if I stayed in the context of conservative theology, because I was so unhappy with it. And I did it as a service to my faith more than just like in defiance of it.
Wow.
I wanted to research all this stuff because it was important to me to keep it, and important of me to have this relationship with God that I still have. And I never wanted to be away from, feel like I was not, like, I never wanted to lose that part of me, that part of my identity, that part of my spiritual life. And to this day, you know, I am equally fascinated by the sacred and the profane in my life and just in general. And so I don't feel like I need anybody's permission. Maybe that's the Protestant in me. I just felt like I just knew that if other people were writing about deconstructing, other people were learning about like sexuality, other people were coming to these conclusions, then I wasn't alone. And if I'm not alone, then this is something that other people are going through.
Yeah. Did you have any concern, though, that it might be wrong to start looking at those things?
I mean, I've looked into other things before that I didn't necessarily agree with. I didn't think it was wrong. No, I'll just say, like, no, I didn't think it was wrong. I'm not afraid of education or information. I know a lot of people, especially in more sheltered and fundamentalist type settings, are genuinely afraid to even learn about these things. But you can learn about something and not agree with it. I tell progressive people that, like, I'm a big like leftist politically. And so sometimes leftists are like, oh, well, we don't want to talk to anybody who used to be really like conservative. And it's like, no, you should be talking to them so you can learn more about what they believe and why they believe it, because that will help establish what we're failing in our politics, what we're not reaching, why people are drawn to that. In politics, they have a whole section of opposition research. I think, sometimes people maybe even start that way. It's like, I'm going to look this up to see how stupid it is that I believe. And then they end up being like, oh, actually, I agree with this myself.
Well, I think you identified me quite clearly as somebody who grew up very fundamentalist in a closed community where we were actually afraid to look at information. Like, education was dangerous because if you knew about something, it had control over you, which is kind of the opposite of this idea that truth will set you free. You actually have to know about something in order for it to not have power over you. So I love that your story is one where you said, I needed to actually basically rescue my faith from being pushed away by this incongruity. And I said, okay, I have to know about this so that it can be like part of this totality of my life. So do you have a few minutes to explore where we go from here?
Sure.
I'm curious about a couple of things. The first thing is just on a personal level, like where would you say you're at in your own growth edge and ongoing learning about polyamory and Christianity right now?
Right now, I am really focusing on, I guess, be like this more spiritual experience. Is like I'm a very religious person, and so now I'm trying to get more back in touch with my spirituality. I had an experience at Wild Goose Festival, where somebody prayed. So I was raised Pentecostal, and somebody prayed over me in tongues, and it made me cry because I was raised, where people would pray over you in tongues, and it was common. And I thought, there are like some LGBTQ friendly Pentecostal organizations, but they're few and far in between, and they're very sparse. By and large, the entire sect is very, very anti-LGBTQ all the way. And so I thought that part of my life was closed because like I still like, and it felt like very homey. And so right now I'm trying to hone in on these like really spiritual experiences with people and like forming relationships that and like I said this in my panel at Wild Goose Festival, where I said that most of my friends tend to be polyamorous, and it's not, because I can have sex with them. In fact, most of them I don't have sex with. It's because there's this level of communication that you've developed where there's no like restrictions in the sort of conversations you can have. There's like this mutual understanding of like, we all aren't owned by another person. We're not, so like we can like develop these like kind of deeper friendships. We have this like mutual understanding, especially other non-monogamous Christians. And I'm trying to really lean into that and form these like lasting relationships with people, not just romantic ones, not just sexual ones, but just like friendships in general. I have been I've also been trying to get back in touch, with my sexuality, because I have been dating the same two people for 5 years and not very many out of that. So I'm trying to go back and explore other like maybe sexual interest I have again. But I've been focusing more these days on community rather than myself.
Yeah.
Important to me to live out my faith, not just in like, oh, well, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. I want to go have these relationships and these sexual experiences, but like I want to form a community in which I can contribute to a greater like community. And I've been getting really involved in like community action and stuff like that.
I was speaking with someone last week who said like one of the most important things for us in our growth is to be doing this in community. And, I mean, even just the conversation that I've gotten to share with you over the past couple of weeks has been really special to me, because I've felt for a long time like a lot of the work that I've done is on my own. And talking with you and even a few others, I'm like, well, really, like there are a lot of us who are in fact going through this process of growing both spiritually in our faith and also sexually in our freedom, like both at the same time, and really having a strong value for both. And just hearing your story and how you've wrestled through that is really meaningful to me. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you. And I feel the same about you. I was really excited to meet you at the Wild Goose Festival. You're very introspective. Oh,
absolutely. So one of the things I'm introspecting on, and this will be my last question, is I'm looking at like, what is the future? Where are we going? And I'm not just looking at this on an individual level, but also like on a, how do I even say this? Both in terms of Christianity and sexuality. Yes, that's important, but also small backstory. In Christianity, a lot of people think about sex as a purely physical thing. It's a biological activity.
Right.
Culture, we think about sex as a pleasurable thing. It's not necessarily about procreation. It's about pleasure, and culture has done a lot better job at that than the church. But I've been exploring this idea kind of where you talked about growing, where there is a spiritual dimension to this, and thinking about sex as prayer. Maybe that's a very blunt way of trying to put it, but I'm trying to understand, like, where do we have capacity to grow? Like, how do you see us evolving as a culture, as a Christian community? What can we learn from polyamory in this process? I guess that's like 5 questions all at once, but I'm kind of curious, where do you see we're going, and like, what excites you about the future and how we're moving?
I think there is this broader conversation coming into play about sexuality beyond just like affirming same-sex relationships, which is obviously very important, but it's also going to be on like, what is sexuality? What is it in the context of like non-monogamy versus monogamy? What does it mean like going forward? There's also questions of like gender identity that go along with it. Like, people are really asking a lot of questions, and like everything's in flux, and it's a really good time not to have a conversation that is not necessarily just like, okay, how can you be a polyamorous person and a Christian? But also it's like, okay, so there are polyamorous Christians, and there's probably always going to be people who can like have faith and then consider themselves non-monogamous. What does that look like to them? I really want to hear from like other people, I'm sure, like, who have that kind of faith, and like what they're finding in their spirituality and their sexuality.
Yeah.
I really liked the sexuality seminar that, I mean, I was speaking at it, but I also took part in it. Like, I didn't know what the other people were going to speak on.
Yeah.
And I loved learning about the way that everybody else expresses their sexuality in the faith-based setting. Because I think that's so important to like learn from other people and like talk about it. And of course we have to talk about it in order to get questions answered and like find each other. And it's harder for that. But I know that this is an ongoing conversation about what sexuality looks like. And from the other perspective, I think you have a little bit more of a higher understanding if you're coming from it, not to offend anybody who's not religious or anything, but a lot of people, when they approach polyamory, especially for the first time, especially if they're already coupled, they tend to hurt their other partners. Like, maybe the other partner is not as non-monogamous as they think. Maybe, like lots of that. And it's coming to terms with that and being honest and communicating well, but also, honoring the people that you're in a relationship with, also, whether it's a non-monogamous relationship or not. I think there needs to be a little bit more thoughtfulness in how, non-monogamous people maybe approach their tactics and their relationships, and being honest and communicating well and taking the other person's feelings into account, not just jumping in and being like, well, I'm non-monogamous, you can take it or leave it. It's
right.
And I really think that people who come from like a faith-based background maybe have a good position to kind of define that, maybe even more than secular people. Not to offend the secular people listening, sorry, but if you're like taking into like, how can I do this mindfully? How can I do this in a way that honors myself and the other people that I'm doing it with? And it's not to say that you need to be in I don't want to like reduce it down to, like only people who are in like long-term serious relationships, those are the only ones that count. That's just, to me, that's just like another form of, well, this is the acceptable form of non-monogamy,
right?
Where it's like, we only like the gay couples who are married and monogamous. Like, I don't want to fall into that. I think sexuality is sacred in any context, even if you never see the other person again. But it's just like really thinking about that and what it means for us, and not giving into like this sort of culture of consumerism when it comes to sex as much as you would, but still also having that freedom and that liberation from a very oppressive sexual culture as depicted in the Bible.
I love your emphasis on liberation all the way through. I feel like we're very aligned in that. there's a lot of people who are struggling to go through that process in a way that is loving. And like you said, if we're approaching this from a Christian framework, like one of our top priorities is how are we loving God? How are we loving our neighbor in the process? And do you have any resources you would recommend, or are you even open to help people through this process if they're like, I have a question, I want to do this, but I don't know. Is that something you're open to conversing?
Yes, I have recently decided, actually on your advice, that I will start offering, like, people can message me and I am happy to Zoom chat with them about any of these issues for 20 minutes, $50 for 20 minutes, I think. Or if you're not a Zoom person, I get it. I'll also like detailed text back and forth too. I'm a very thorough writer. So like I will write back and forth, like in-depth emails too. Just like to help people. If you're not into that, you can subscribe to my blog, Dirtbag Christian. You can buy your book. You can buy Dr. Kevin Jensen's book. You can also, see a regular therapist. There are poly-friendly therapists. You can literally Google that, poly-friendly therapist. That field is exploding. So many people I know who are in the therapy field are looking for, a poly mindset in their therapy models. And so that's becoming more and more accessible.
Yeah. You
can find a local polyamory group to discuss your issues. It's harder when you're faith-based. The guys over at Queer Theology do really good work. So those are the resources that I would recommend.
Cool. And so if somebody wanted to reach out to you, how would they do that?
I am not really JCM everywhere. NOTREALLY JCM. You can find my Substack, Dirtbag Christian. You can Google Jennifer C. Martin, because I go by Jennifer C. Martin because Jennifer Martin is like one of the most common names in the America. So like you can go, if you Google Jennifer Martin, it comes up with like a voice actress and a doctor, and like I think there's like one of me, I think. But but I'm easy to find online, and I'm pretty receptive and pretty available. So definitely just reach out to me.
Cool. Now, I know it's been fun finally starting to connect on social media, and I'll be sure to share some of these links. I think there's a thing called podcast notes, this being the first one that I've done. I'll have to see if I can put that together. Otherwise, I know at least on the YouTube post, we can easily share those so people can connect with you. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. I've enjoyed talking with you, hearing your story. One of the takeaways I'm going to be thinking about is what you said is like, what difference does Christianity make in how I approach polyamory? Like, that's going to be something I'm taking away.
I think about that question more than I think about how does polyamory influence my Christianity. I'm more thinking, how does my Christianity influence my polyamory?
Wow. Well, maybe there's another conversation to be had there. But it's time for us to wrap up. Again, if anybody is interested in contacting Jennifer, you have the information and the details there. I'm always open to these conversations as well, especially if you're in this phase of needing permission to deconstruct and ask questions. Yes. I can help you go into the Bible and use the Bible, in fact, to deconstruct modern Christian ethics, which are really terrible in my opinion. But if you just want an easy way to get started, check out my book, Sacred, Not Sinful, same title as this podcast. It's called A New Christian Sexual Ethic, and there's all kinds of interesting stuff in there. Well, that's it for me. Jennifer, do you have any final words you want to share with the audience?
No, I think they should just continue listening to your podcast and read your book.
Amazing. Well, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Sacred Not Sinful podcast. If you resonated with something or have a question that came up, I'd love to hear from you. And if you're ready to take the next step, I invite you to connect with me at discover.courageousintimacy.org. There, you can download my book for free, invite me to speak or facilitate an experience for your community, or simply join me online for a workshop or discussion group. As always, be sure to like, subscribe, and let me know if there's anything I can do to support and celebrate your journey to integrate faith and sexuality. Until next time, I'm Dr. Kevin Jensen, and this has been the Sacred, Not Sinful podcast. Thank you for listening.